Hi, I'm Chris, and I've been helping beginners and non-coders launch their apps since 2013. And since you're here watching this video, I'm confident that I can help you do the same thing. This video series is for people who want to learn how to code. It's still a valuable skill in this age of AI. In fact, we'll be making full use of AI to enhance your learning and to help you gain coding skills as fast as possible. The success stories you saw earlier, those people didn't even have AI when they were learning to code. So I'm sure for you, it's going to be smoother, faster, and easier. On the other hand, if you don't want to learn how to code, you only want to use AI to build apps, check out this video over here. However, I will say that knowing basic coding skills, such as the ones I'm going to show you in this video series, it will save you hours of frustration and headache. And I know this firsthand because I've spoken with the people who have gone down that path only using AI to code, and they tell me that they wish they knew basic coding skills. So I would still recommend that you go through this video series. Okay, moving on. This series has been updated for Xcode 26, and the cool thing about Xcode 26 is that it's called a built-in coding assistant, which we are going to make full use of because we want to use AI to help you learn as efficiently as possible. Now, by the end of this video series, you'll be able to write and express simple app logic in Swift. You'll be able to build simple user interfaces in SwiftUI. You'll know your way around Xcode 26. You'll be familiar with using AI to both help get you unstuck during your learning and to speed up your learning as well. You'll understand how apps are submitted and published into the Apple App Store. And last but not least, you'll have a plan on how to progress your learning after this video series towards the app that you ultimately want to build. So if all of that sounds good, let's get started. First of all, I want to give you a 10,000-foot view of how we build and publish apps so that you can see what your journey is going to look like. So we start off by downloading the official development app from Apple, and it's called Xcode. Now, this app does look a little scary when you first launch it. There's a ton of buttons and different panels, but don't worry, in lesson 2 of this series, we're going to break it down. We're going to make it very simple for you on how to use Xcode. Xcode is an app that is only available on Mac computers. This can be a deal breaker for many people, but if you don't have access to a Mac or you don't want to invest in one, there are other ways, such as Rent a Mac, which allows you to remote into a Mac from your PC, and then you can use it for development like that for a small fee. We can talk more about these options when we get to downloading and installing using Xcode. But what do we do inside Xcode? Well, we write code. There's actually 2 different types of code that you write. One is called Swift, and that is to express the app logic and the brains behind your app. The other type of code that you write is called SwiftUI, and UI stands for user interface, which is just a technical term for the screens that the user sees when they're using your app. So you write SwiftUI code to describe the screen and to build the screen of your app. Now, as you're coding your app inside Xcode, you're going to need to test it to make sure that it works as you progress. You can do that one of 2 different ways. One way is if you have an actual iPhone, you can plug it into your computer and Xcode will be able to install your app onto the phone so that you can physically interact with your app and test it. If you don't have a physical device, don't worry. Xcode comes with what's called an iOS simulator. And you can think of it as a virtual iPhone that will appear on your screen. And then you can interact with your app and test it just like you would on an actual device. All right, now let's say you've finished coding it, you've tested it, and you are ready to launch it. How does it get from Xcode to the App Store? Well, inside Xcode, once your app is ready to go, you compile it. And that's just a fancy word of taking all of the code along with the resources such as image assets, font files, and packaging it up into a bundle. And then Xcode is going to upload that bundle to a web portal that you can access on the browser. It's called App Store Connect. And once it's uploaded to App Store Connect, you can just log in and you would fill out all of the metadata for the app. Things like the title, the description, the keywords, the categories, the pricing if it's a paid app. And once you've done that, you hit a button to submit the app for review because Apple needs to make sure that your app follows all of its guidelines and that it doesn't break any of its rules and things like that. And it'll either do one of 2 things. It'll either approve your app, in which case your app is going to be live on the App Store for people to download, or number 2, it may reject your app and it'll tell you why it's rejected it because of maybe certain things that you need to change. And don't worry, There is no penalty for rejection. All you need to do is fix up whatever they ask you, and you can resubmit it and they'll look at it again. And this cycle can happen as many times as needed in order to get your app approved. Now, the thing is, in order to get access to App Store Connect to publish your apps, you have to be a member of the Apple Developer Program. There is no requirement to join this program. All you have to do is pay Apple an annual fee of $100 USD. And by doing that, you'll be able to submit as many apps as you want. And as long as you continue to pay that annual fee, your apps will stay on the App Store. So taking a step back, here's what you need to learn. You need to learn how to use Xcode. You need to learn how to read and write Swift code as well as SwiftUI code. And you need to learn the process of compiling your app and submitting it to the App Store. Not to worry, those are all things that we will cover in this series. So by the end of it, you're going to have everything you need in order to start building your own apps. It's time to roll up our sleeves and jump right in. In the next lesson, we'll download and install Xcode, and I'll show you how we use it to build apps. Oh, by the way, if you're looking for one-on-one support, live training, courses, and a community to motivate and keep you accountable, check out CWC+. In the last lesson, I walked you through an overview of your learning journey. And that includes learning to use Xcode, learning how to read and write Swift code, which is used for the app logic, learning how to read and write Swift UI code, which is used to describe the screens and the views that the user sees. In this lesson, we're going to focus on setting up and going through Xcode. And by the end of this lesson, you're going to have a working knowledge of using Xcode to start building views. Now, I'll start by saying that Xcode is the same tool that professional iOS developers use day in and day out to build apps. That doesn't mean that this piece of software is complicated. It just means that it has a lot of features and bells and whistles, but I'm going to break it down for you, make sure that you only have what you need at this point to start working with it. So don't be overwhelmed. Let's get started. Okay, step one is to download and install Xcode. So on your Mac, hit Command and Spacebar and launch the App Store. Now, if you don't have a Mac, don't worry, there are options for you, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But first, launch the App Store. In the corner, search for Xcode, and you should come across this listing right here. This is going to be the official tool from Apple. As you can see, it's #1 in developer tools. Do note the size. You're going to need actually more hard drive space than this because there's going to be additional developer components that need to be downloaded after the fact. So make sure you have at least 20 gigs or more, I would say. And do not be alarmed by the ratings here. As I've said, developers are forced to use this, and some of them have a love-hate relationship with Apple. I myself really don't mind Xcode. I think it's quite pleasant. Now, if you don't have a Mac, what do? Well, you can use a service called rentamac.io. And this allows you to remote desktop from your PC into the Mac to use Xcode and the iOS simulator, which we'll talk about in this video. But as you can see here, you can develop iOS apps like this. And these Macs were built for development. Now, in terms of pricing, it can get down to as low as a couple of dollars a day. And as you can see, these are pretty up-to-date Macs, and you can get immediate access. Because there aren't very many services like that out there for PC users, I negotiated a discount with them, especially for you and other CodeWithChris viewers. So you can check out in the description below, there's a link to rentamac.io. And you will get a discount on your plan, and I will get a referral bonus as well at no extra cost to you. So thank you if you use that. Now, I will say that this service isn't for everybody. If you are planning to do this long term, then investing in a refurbished Mac or a used Mac, I would say no more than 2 years old would be a good place to be in, and that Mac will last you another 4 years or so. But if you are unsure of iOS development, you're not sure if this is for you, if you can get a handle on it, that's perfectly normal. This is a good way to get your feet wet and try it out if you don't have access to a Mac right now. All right, so now that we all have access to Xcode, let's dive in and start our first Xcode project. So launching Xcode for the first time, you might get a dialog that pops up asking you to install additional components, like which platforms you want. By default, Mac will be selected, and you can also select iOS, right? And go ahead and install those developer components. After all of that is done, you're going to be presented with a new project screen that looks like this. So we are going to start by creating a new project by hitting this, or you can go up to File, you can go up to New, and you can choose Project. Same thing. It will present to you a dialog As we said, Xcode can be used to develop for all different platforms on the Apple ecosystem. We are going to choose iOS and we're going to choose app. Then go ahead and click next. And I'm going to make this very simple for you. For the project name, just type in test because we're just exploring here. Team, you don't have to choose anything. The organization identifier is going to be com dot whatever your name is or company name is. And together with the product name, that's going to be a specific ID for your app. As for interface, it should be set to SwiftUI. Make sure it is not on Storyboard. That's the older way of doing things. Language is set to Swift, and testing system and storage, both none. Let's go ahead and hit next. This is where you're going to save it. I'm just going to save it on my desktop, and make sure this is unchecked. We don't need to worry about this for now. Let's go ahead and hit create, and then you're going to have a brand new Xcode project, your first one. Now it's going to look overwhelming because there's going to be a lot of panels and there's going to be a lot of buttons. Let me just expand this a little larger so that we can see what's going on. You can also, there's a divider here. You can adjust it like that. And then we're going to go through the different sections of Xcode now. So there used to be 5 main sections of Xcode, but now there are 6. And we'll get to that 6th one in just a second. Let's start all the way on the left with the navigator area. Now this is navigating currently your files in your project. There are different tabs. These are different navigators for navigating through different things, whether they be issues in your project or maybe search terms that you're looking for or anything like that. Most of the time, you'll probably be in this first navigator, which is the project navigator, going through the different files in your project. You'll also notice that as I tap on these different files, that this main area changes. This main area is called the editor area, and it changes depending on what file you're trying to edit. Makes sense, right? If I'm looking at a code file that has a view, it's going to be split into code as well as a canvas where you can see a preview of what that view will look like. If it is just a code file that doesn't show any view, then you're not going to see the canvas. And you can also customize how this looks. We won't dive into that right now. If I look at this, this is for adding images into the project, so it's going to look a little different as well. Don't worry, we'll walk through all of these different file types and how you use them. But for now, this middle area is the editor area. On the right-hand side, we have the utility area, and this contains information, sometimes configuration as well, about the different files. It can also give information about different pieces of code. For example, this utility is a quick help where depending on where you are highlighting and putting your mouse, it's going to give you information about that code. So that's the utility area. Across the top, this is the toolbar, and this is going to be really important. Right here, you're going to see stop and run. This is to stop and run your project respectively. Hitting run is going to launch the iOS simulator, which is something we'll talk about later in this video. It's a virtual iPhone that sits on your screen so that you can test your app even if you don't have an actual iPhone or device. Also, across the top here, you can choose what version of the simulator you want to use. So maybe you want to test it on an iPad, you can do that. And then on the toolbar, you'll also see status of what's happening in your project. Here, you have a little navigational breadcrumb, and this is very helpful when you are jumping between files in your project. All right, we're almost done with the sections of Xcode. There's a hidden one down here that you can uncover by hitting that button right here. This area is hidden by default because this is very useful as you are building your project. It's going to show output from your code. It's going to show errors and different things like that. Here, this is the debug or console area. We're going to be using this area when we start coding. For now, let's keep it hidden. And there is one new 6th area of Xcode that is the coding assistant. So if you tap on this, it takes away the navigator, it turns into a coding assistant, and we'll set this up in just a second. However, I want to say one last thing about the different areas of Xcode because you can hide and show the various areas. So if I tap on this button, it's going to hide or show the navigators. If I tap on this button, it's going to hide or show the utility area. Furthermore, this button allows me to customize the editor a little bit, but let's not dive into that just yet. You can also go into the View menu and you can show or hide different areas of Xcode. So the navigators here, you can do that, show it again. The inspectors inside the utility area. Furthermore, we have the debug area or console, which we talked about, the tray that sits at the bottom. And let's talk about set up the coding assistant now. You can tap on this button to do that. So if you hit setup, I would recommend just sticking with ChatGPT for now and not diving into Claude or anything like that. This will be the simplest to get started with. So go ahead and go through this and turn it on. By default, Xcode 26 will give you free tokens or free credits to use with ChatGPT, which is what makes it really easy to get started with. If you already have an account, you can sign in and use your own limits and things like that, but this is completely sufficient for us. All right, so those are the main areas of Xcode. I know it's a little bit overwhelming because we haven't put it into context. So now I want to take a look at the actual project that's been created for us. Let's start actually using Xcode, and a lot of the pieces will fall into place. Let's start by taking a look at the project that we've created. What is in a new project? Click this button to go back to the file navigator. And I want to take a look at this first node here. This is your Xcode project file, and it contains all of the configuration and properties for the project. If you tap on it, in the editor area, you're going to see all the project configuration. Here you can decide what platforms you want this app to be able to run on. You can choose what version of iOS you want to target as a minimum. You can specify the app name. You can specify the orientations. These are just a couple of the options. There's a lot of different options here. The reason you don't see any of the files is because you can expand and close that. Now I want to actually bring up the actual files on your hard drive when you create the project. So let me go ahead and open that folder. So you'll see that this we called our project test, right? Test.xcodeproj. This is your project file, and it contains all of this configuration. They're not the actual code files in your project, however. Those are stored inside another folder here. Right now you can see how it maps to the file navigator here. This is your Xcode proj file. This is the folder containing actually all of the code and image files for your project. So if I bring back up here, you're going to see test app.swift. These have a .swift extension. There's that content view. It's right here. And assets.xc assets. This is another folder. If you open it up, it actually contains more folders. And the reason it's like this is because this is for your image assets and different color definitions for your app. Inside Xcode, this folder actually doesn't appear as a folder. If you tap into it, the editor area changes into this. The reason why this is not a folder is because it's easier to manage like an image catalog. So as you're going to see in the next lesson, when we add images to our project, we're going to add it right here to our image catalog. And you could also specify colors in your app icons here. All of that gets stored inside this folder here, assets.xc assets. So that's a simple explanation of what an Xcode project actually is and how it gets represented inside Xcode. Now let's go ahead and make some code changes. Now let me explain what these two files are. So if you open test app, you'll notice that there's an @main. This specifies the main entry point for your app. It's kind of like the launching point, if you will. Here you can specify different things you want to happen at launch. You're going to be writing code in here if you need to. But also notice that it creates a content view. You don't need to know what it is or how that works right now. I just want you to see the connection between content view here in the app launch point and content view here in this content view.swift file. then notice that this code file actually opens up the canvas here because there's a view. You notice the keywords view here. Don't dive too deep into it. I just wanted to explain what these different files are. This is actually a screen in your app. So if you just take a step back, right, this is the app launch point, and it creates a screen, maps to the screen. This is what the user is going to see at this point when they launch your app, right? If you don't see this canvas, this preview here, you can click on this button and you can make sure that the canvas is toggled on. This gives you a preview of what this code generates. We're not going to dive specifically into the code right now because it's going to be for next lesson, but I do want to walk through a little change with you. Again, because we have selected content view on the file navigator, our editor area changes to edit that file. And this is the code inside. I just want you to make a simple change. You see this line of code right here, text, open bracket, quotation mark, hello, comma, world, and then end quotation and end bracket. You can actually change the text here in between the quotation marks. So you can get rid of it. What happens? The text is gone because there is no text, right? So you can say anything you want. Let's just put our name there, and you can see it immediately reflected in the canvas. Now, sometimes it might say canvas is paused, and you're going to have to click a little button to resume the canvas reflecting the code. So you can go ahead and do that. But the canvas is a great way to get a preview of what you're building. You can even interact with the canvas in the case where there are buttons or sliders or something like that. We're not going to dive into that right now because I do want to show you how to test your app inside the iOS simulator, which we mentioned earlier in this video. So up here in the Xcode toolbar, you're going to choose, I would choose iPhone 17 Pro or a different simulator, whatever version of Xcode you're running, just choose one of the iPhone simulators. And then what you're going to do is hit this play icon, which runs your project. So if you had any coding errors, let's say that when you were making this text change, you accidentally erased one of those quotes, well, that's actually going to give you an error and it's not going to run. So make sure that you didn't break anything when you're changing this text. Make sure it's text, open bracket, quote, and then the text, end quote, end bracket. Now, when you hit that run button that I just did, you can see in the status bar right here what it's doing behind the scenes because there's no visual indication right now, right? It's installing the app onto an iPhone 17 Pro simulator. And if it's the first time running the simulator, it's going to take a little while to boot up. So expect this to take a couple of minutes. But after that, every time you hit this run button, it's going to be pretty fast, within 5-6 seconds type of thing. But the first time is going to take a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to fast forward the video a little bit here. And sometimes as well, it doesn't pop it up right on the screen. So if you look in your toolbar, you're going to see the iOS simulator button look like this. Click it and it will actually pop this up so you can see it. See, it's launching the iPhone right now. And then it's going to install our app onto it. I'm getting these pop-ups because it's the first time running this simulator here. Okay, finally, we see our app on the screen. So this is our text change as well. So you can see how it translates to launching an app, right? This is the entry or app launch point. It creates the first view. And if you click into content view, you can see exactly how that view looks right here based on the code that is written right here. And then when you launch that app, you can see it actually reflected like this. So pretty simple to understand, right? In the next lesson, once we learn some SwiftUI code that we can use to customize the user interface or the views, you're going to be able to see something different. Okay, so that's your very basic app. And what makes it more complex would be, as you learn more SwiftUI code, you're going to be building views and user interfaces that are a lot more complex than this. You are also going to be adding additional views aside from just content view. You're going to be providing ways to navigate from view to view, right? And then as you learn Swift code for the app logic, you are going to be able to add functionality so that when the user interacts with the screen, you can make something happen. Okay, so to get out of this, you can hit the stop button right here, and that is going to stop running the project. You can see up here, finished running test on iPhone 17, and then it's gone right now. Now this simulator is going to stay launched. If you're done with the simulator, you can hit X to close it. However, having this simulator up and running lets you launch your app really quickly the next time you hit this run button. So it's just going to launch it almost instantaneously. Okay, so I do want to talk about the AI panel. So let's stop the project and hit on AI. Now, as a learner, you want to have a more inquisitive approach to using AI in Xcode. If you are a vibe coder, you don't want to learn, you're just going to be using the AI to tell it to do things for you. But you're here in this video series because you want to learn. So I would advise you to, instead of writing prompts to say, do this for me, or build this UI for me, or do this for me, to instead say, I want to accomplish this. How do I go about doing that? What are the best ways to do that? What are my options to do that? And that can apply to code. That can also apply to just Xcode in general. So for example, this video, we're talking about learning how to use Xcode, right? Let's say you forget about how to hide the inspector panel. How do I hide the utility? Or let's use the terminology that they use. So you're asking questions about Xcode, right? So you get instructions about that. Don't worry about memorizing everything that we talked about in this lesson, because you can have ChatGPT here as an assistant for anything that you might forget. So you might also ask, remind me what test app file is. We talked about how that's the app entry point, but this can remind you of that in case you forget. Having this panel is an amazing tool for anyone who's learning Xcode and iOS app development. And it's better than using ChatGPT or Claude in the web browser because it's contextual to Xcode. For example, if I'm just writing these prompts inside ChatGPT in a browser, it's not going to know what I'm talking about. But in the context of this project, it's just like having someone beside you, your instructor or me, right? You're asking me a question and I'm just telling you and I'm pointing it out to you right then and there. So use it. Use it as a learning tool, right? As we go along in the series, I'll give you more examples of what you can do with the panel. But for now, I want you to treat this panel as if I'm sitting there and you can ask me anything you want as we're going through these lessons. All right, so now you have a working, practical knowledge of Xcode and you're ready to go to the next step, which is actually writing SwiftUI code. And don't be intimidated. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. It's going to be very simple. I will say a couple of things at this point. Number one, if you don't feel familiar yet with Xcode, it still feels very foreign. That's completely normal. All it takes is a little bit more time. And I'm here with you every step of the way through these lessons. You will get used to using it, especially just the core pieces, right? And for now, that's all you're going to need. If you feel like you need some additional help or you want some personalized support, do check out our C2C Plus program, which includes access to a community where you can stay motivated, you can connect with other like-minded learners, but more than that, you can get support from the team and I. It also includes live training workshops, and it also includes hours of courses that you can take at your own pace. All right, with that said, I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to lesson 3. So to do a quick recap of your journey so far, you've got a map of your journey, you've gotten an overview of Xcode, but now we are going to dive into SwiftUI code, and this will actually help you get used to using Xcode. Now, the reason I start with SwiftUI code, which is for describing all of the views and the screens, instead of starting with Swift code, which is to express the app logic, is because SwiftUI code is a lot more fun. And for a beginner who's just starting out, to be able to write some code and see something show up on the screen, that they did that with their lines of code, that gives positive reinforcement and that makes things fun. And in my experience as a teacher, teaching this stuff for over 10 years, that makes a huge difference for a student wanting to continue versus one that just gets overwhelmed and gives up. And I don't want that to be you. So we're starting with SwiftUI. Don't worry though, even though it is code, by the end of this lesson, you'll see that it's actually very easy to understand. And in a way, it's almost visual because you'll see a line of code, but in your head, you'll be translating it to, oh, that represents an image, or oh, this line of code represents a text label. All right, let's get started. I want to introduce you to SwiftUI by showing you how to build this card. Now, there's a lot of interesting things happening in this card, but when you break it down, it's actually pretty simple. The way I want you to think of SwiftUI is like you're constructing Lego. For example, this piece of text is a Lego piece. This image is another Lego piece. And once you know what Lego pieces you have available, you begin to have an idea of how you can put them together to form something like this. So let's start by introducing you to some of the Lego pieces that you can use. So right here, I have the Xcode project we worked on earlier. If you still have that, go ahead and launch that now, because we're going to take a look at some of the pre-done code for us that's inside the content view. So I'm going to close this debug area by pressing that button. And then also notice that my canvas is paused. I'm going to hit this button to resume the canvas. The first Lego piece that I want to call out to you is something that you've already worked on. Oh, so here is a button that you can click to zoom in on your preview inside your canvas. Okay, so there's these buttons down here. And I'm going to be showing you things like that as we move along, rather than trying to show you every single function and button up front, because that's going to be overwhelming. So like I said, you have worked with this already by changing the text. So this is your first Lego. It allows you to put a piece of text on the screen. I want you to ignore all of the other code for now and just focus on this line 17. It's pretty intuitive, right? You see the word text, and then inside brackets is the text that you want to display. But you have to put it in a pair of quotes. You can also make it multiple lines. So for example, inside here, I can say teaches iOS, but if I want to add a new line, I just need to add that character there. Okay, so let's do that. /n. Pretty simple, right? If you wanted to display another text, you can. Let's do that. This is fun. Pretty simple. If you launch this app right now in the simulator, this is exactly what you're going to see. You are building a user interface. Okay, second piece of Lego, this image right here. Now, I want you to ignore these two lines, but just take a look at this line right up here. Notice that the keyword is image instead of text. This piece of Lego is used to display images or icons, and it follows the same format. You have image, then you have a set of brackets, and inside the brackets, you are going to put what you want to display. Now notice that it says globe inside a pair of quotes, but it doesn't actually have the word globe on the screen. Why is this? Because this piece of text, globe, is actually referring to that icon in the system library of icons. So that's what this means here. System name, colon, and then the name of the icon that you want to display. So how do we see this catalog of icons that we can use? Well, these icons are actually called SF symbols. And if you do a Google search for SF symbols, there's actually an app that you can download from Apple that you can browse this catalog of icons. So I have it installed. You can go ahead and go to this website and you can hit this download button and you can go ahead and download this free app. You probably want to download the latest one there. And then you're going to get a catalog of icons. Let me show you what that looks like. So here I have it launched. You can do a search, but let's just, for example, use this icon right here. The name of this icon is square.n.arrow.up.fill. You can just go ahead, right click it, copy the name, and then you can come here and replace the name inside quotes. You have to specify it in quotes. and paste it in there. And you can see the icon has changed. So that's a quick and easy way to display icons. In this catalog, there are a lot of icons. If it doesn't exist, like the icon that you want to display, you can always create an image and display it as an image instead of as an icon in the system library. We're going to get to displaying images in just a second. Okay, but I want to show you one more way that you can access these SF symbols. Someone's created this, an online SF symbols browser. So you can also look at it from here. It's kind of hard to see. Personally, I like to have this app available for me, and it's free anyways. So that's one way to use this image Lego block. Another way is that you can display actual image assets that you add to the project. So we mentioned the asset library before. So go ahead and click on it, and you can drag and drop any image that you want in here. So let me go ahead and find an image to use. It can even be a PDF. So I'm just going to grab something that I have available on my desktop, deliverybox.pdf, and I'm just going to put it right there. So you can see that's what it looks like. And what just happened by me dragging that file into my asset library? Well, number one, it has actually copied that image inside of our project directory. So let's open up where we saved our project. And remember how I told you that all the files are here, and then the asset library is actually a folder. If we open this folder, you're going to see there's my delivery box. It's in its own little folder, and there is my file. So that means that when we're ready to launch this app into the App Store, when we turn this project into a bundle to upload to the App Store, it's going to include this image asset in there. The second thing is that by putting it into my project, it's given it a name. I can rename this. The reason the name is important is because I need to be able to refer to this image asset by name. So right now it's delivery space box. If I just tap on it, just click it once, wait a couple of seconds, I can edit it. Maybe I'll just call it box so that it's easy to reference, okay? So this image name is called box. If I go back to content view now, I can specify, instead of saying system library icon name, I'm just going to reference box. Okay, so I'm going to just delete all of that. So all I have is image with a pair of brackets, and I'm going to use a pair of quotes to specify my image name. As you can see, no image appears now because I haven't specified it. But as soon as I put box, my box shows up. Awesome. So now you know 2 SwiftUI Lego pieces. Now let's turn our attention to these 2 lines of code. What are these? Now we talked about the image, text, and text, but these follow a different format. Right? These are dot something. And it's almost as if these 2 are attached to our image. In fact, it is. These 2 are called modifiers. And what they do is they modify how this Lego block behaves or looks. And you can kind of infer what this modifies by reading it. Dot image scale, dot large. It's scaling it up. Dot foreground style, dot tint. Now this one is a little less obvious, but it's trying to change the foreground color to the tint color. I'm going to remove these 2 lines because it applied to the system icon when we had the globe icon, but it doesn't apply to this new image box because the way an image behaves is different from the way the icon behaves. So for now, I'm just going to get rid of that. Instead, what I'm going to do is show you an example of a modifier on our text label. I'm going to hit enter and then dot. And here we can change, let's say, the color of the text. So I'm going to choose foreground. I'm going to start typing. I'm going to choose foreground style, this first one right here. I'm going to choose that. Or you could just hit enter. And then I'm going to hit dot. And I'm going to be able to choose, let's say, just red. Hit enter. And now you can see that our text changes red because this has modified how this Lego piece looks. Now, I've been saying Lego pieces, and you can kind of see what the analogy is like. I'm going to stop using that analogy because I don't want it to ingrain in your head because that's not the proper word to use. The proper terminology is a view, but you can think of it as a component, a Lego piece, an element. It's just a thing on the screen. So here's our image view. Here's our text view with a red modifier. Here's another text view. Now your mind might immediately be racing and thinking, what other views are there? What other modifiers are there? We'll get to that in time, but follow along because I'm building up how SwiftUI works. Okay, so right now we have two different views that you know of, image and text. It's not good enough just to be able to put these views onto the screen because it's not going to look the way we want. We need to be able to arrange these views in certain ways. For example, all three of these views are one on top of another. Right? We have the box, but then we have the red label, then we have the black label. Well, how is that happening? Is it because we've just written it like this? Image, text, text? No, actually, it's because of this right here. This is another view. It's called a V stack. And what it does is it arranges things vertically. That's what the V stands for. But here's the thing. You can't actually see the V stack, but it's still called a view. Think of it as a view container or a layout view. So how it works is you've got the keyword V stack right there. And then notice that it's got a different type of bracket. It's got a curly bracket. And when I highlight this, you can see that that briefly highlights as well. Because the V stack works like this. There's an opening curly bracket, and let me just get rid of this for now. I'm going to cut it. It's got an opening curly bracket and an ending curly bracket. Whatever views I put inside of here gets arranged vertically. So that's why having the image and the two text views in here, they're arranged vertically. It's because they're inside this V stack. So that's basically all SwiftUI is. I'm sorry to disappoint, but it's basically declaring view elements and then using view layout containers to arrange them in however way you want, and then adding modifiers to the views to get them to look just right. Instead of boring you by doing more demonstrations, let's learn by doing, and let's attempt to build this card interface. So take a good look at it because we're going to go back into Xcode and we're going to turn our test demo into this card. So we're going to start by adding the Niagara Falls image asset here. Now you don't have to use this specific image asset, but if you want to, I'll provide a link below in the video for you to get the image asset. No email necessary, or you just get any image you want. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this image over here. It's going to be Niagara Falls in all lowercase like that. And you can see the image right there. So let's go back to the content view. We are going to keep the V stack because if you noticed in the card, there is really the image, and then there is like the title and then the description and then some icons. We need a V stack for that. And instead of getting rid of the image and text elements, we can actually reuse them. So for the image up here, let's change it from box to Niagara Falls, and then it's going to display this image. Now it's going to be full screen because the image is actually really, really big. So we need to resize that down, and we can do that using modifiers. So first of all, there is a modifier called resizable, and it allows you to resize the image. So I'm going to say resizable, going to do that. But you'll notice now that the image is really skewed. It doesn't look like it looks really squished. So we are going to want to add another modifier to maintain the aspect ratio. And if you've never heard of that term before, it's basically maintaining the ratio between the width and the height, scaling it up or down, but maintaining that ratio so that it doesn't appear squished. So there's an aspect ratio modifier, which we can use. That's this first one right here. And if you hit dot, you're going to be able to choose a content mode. There's two different ones. So the difference you can read in the description down here. Content mode fit, it resizes the content so that it's all within the available space, whereas fill, it tries to occupy all available space. You can just do both to see how that works. Let's try fit first. And so it looks like that, whereas fill looks like that. So quite different. But however, in either case, it's not squished anymore. It's just cropped. So we're going to use fit because that looks like most of what we need. At this point, you might be wondering, well, how are you supposed to know what sorts of modifiers you can put on a view? This is where the AI assistant would come in handy. So you can say, what other modifiers are available for my image view? Or you could look up documentation for this as well. But let's just see what this comes up with first. So here it gives you some examples of different types of modifiers. For example, for shape and masking, here's another one, corner radius for rounded corners, which is actually what we're going to need. You can add borders and overlays. Again, really, really great. If you know what you want, but you're not sure if there is a modifier, again, you can ask ChatGPT. And I'm doing this for the sake of demonstration so that you know potentially what sorts of things you can ask AI. I want to round the corners of my image. What modifiers can I use? Or what options do I have? Right? And this is very different from saying to AI, round the corners of my image, because that is not learning, right? It's going to do it. And then I guess you could review the code. But instead of doing that, I think that having this step where you're asking what your options are and how you can do it, it helps you gain the knowledge more, because you then have to read and then you have to apply it yourself. And just that very act of doing it increases your learning. So let's see what it said. Okay, so corner radius, there's also clip shape or use circle. So it gave us several options already. The most straightforward one is this one, corner radius. Okay. Oh, look, it also showed this one, scaled to fit. You could do that instead of aspect ratio. So wow, look, you learned something just by asking and reading. So let's try this out. Instead of using aspect ratio, why don't we use scale to fit? Gives us the same result. Nothing's changing in the preview. Perfect. And this is exactly how you are going to go through the process of learning with AI. Corner radius will be deprecated in a future version of iOS. Use clip shape or fill instead. So that's not good, but let's just try it out and see if it's going to work for us. And indeed it does. But remember, we were recommended to use clip shape instead. Look, we can even just copy this code and then we can just paste it here. Oh, it's in context, right? It knows this image. So I can copy this whole thing and I can replace this. Okay, and so now let's just move this canvas a little smaller. You can see rounded rectangle, corner radius 16, style continuous. Okay. Even though corner radius is going to be deprecated, it's so much easier to use, right? Okay, so I love that example of using AI to learn. We've got the image down. Let's change this text next. This is going to be Niagara Falls. And let's get rid of the red because it wasn't red. But what we want to do is change this to a bigger font, right? So we can change it with a modifier. And I'm going to open the brackets. And in between the brackets, I'm going to hit dot. And I'm actually going to choose title. There's different sizes you can use. So the more that you see me do this, the more you are going to learn and remember that these are modifiers that you can use, or you could just ask AI. Let's make that also a little bolder. So there is a bold modifier that you can add to it as well. And then for this one, I'm going to say, come visit for an experience of a lifetime. It's not really that exciting. I mean, I live in Canada, I live in Ontario, and I've been here. It's exciting, but it's not that exciting. I'm definitely writing a brochure here. We want to left align all the text because that's the way it is in the card. Now, there is an easy way to do that with the VStack. Here, you can actually specify some options for your VStack. You see how a lot of the times it's like the view name and then brackets for options and things like that, or configuration. Same thing with VStack. So put that. And then there's actually, if you hit dot, you can choose leading. I'm actually missing something here. Okay, this is a great chance to learn as well. Now, the way that I can know what options there are for the VStack is A, watching other people do it through experience, just like watching tutorials and stuff like this. 2, you can use the quick help, the utility panel right here. So if you click over to this quick help inspector and you put your cursor on VStack, or maybe just highlight it like that, it gives you some information. But what we can also do is ask AI. So you can say what config options are available for VStacks. And then you can learn and you can dive deeper into VStacks and learn about that. So it actually even detects the error that we have here. And again, this is why it's so great using this instead of just ChatGPT in the browser. It wouldn't have known about any of this, and it would talk about VStack generically, whereas this is contextual. So it's telling me that, hey, you actually need the alignment label here. Okay, that's how you're going to change it to leading. Now, if I didn't do this and I just see this error here, right, you can always click this and sometimes it is going to just show you the fix. You can just hit apply. If it doesn't show this, look, it's got this generate. So this would then call AI to take a look at what's wrong and offer suggestions. It's easier than ever for beginners to use Xcode. You don't have to be stuck anymore. So let's hit apply. Boom, alignment, dot leading. Now you can see all of our text is actually left aligned exactly how we wanted. All right, now let's build the little star review widget beside the Niagara Falls title. For this, you're going to need something that can lay out our views horizontally. Guess what? Just like how there's a V stack, there is an H stack, which stands for horizontal stack. We are going to put our title into an H stack and then also put the stars into the H stack. So first of all, let's code an H stack here. We are going to open up the curly brackets there. And just in case I didn't mention this before, in order to type out these curly brackets, you hold Shift, and right beside the letter P, there's angle brackets, right? So you hold down Shift and you press those angle brackets or square brackets and you get these curly brackets. Okay, so we're going to make some space between the two curly brackets and we're going to put our text element in there. I'm going to hold down Command X, cut it, Command V to paste it. And so we've got our title there. But let's put some stars now. Here we can use SF symbols. That's why it's handy to have this app. And here we have search for star. We've got some stars. Let's use this one, star fill. Copy the name. And how do we use these again? We use the image view, right? Open brackets, system name. Okay. And then we specify the icon name in a set of quotes. Star fill. So we've got 1 star. Then we're going to copy this line and we're going to paste it 4 times for 4 stars. I'm going to copy the half star as well. And the last one is going to be a half star. So let's just actually copy one more copy here and change this to a half star. So now I've got 4.5 stars. Now I want to create some space between Niagara Falls and the 5 stars. There is a view called a spacer. And what it does is it expands as big as possible to take up all the space. So you see how we have this H stack. It lays things out horizontally, right? We have the text view, and then we have a bunch of image views right beside each other. And then we have this empty space. So all of the empty spaces at the end. If we want to put the empty space in between, I would put a spacer right here. This is how it looks. Spacer followed by a pair of brackets. And you can see now that's our spacer. It expands to take up as much space as possible, pushing the title all the way to the left and pushing the stars all the way to the right. Okay, so now we've got our stars. But if you take a look at the card image, we also have a little piece of text below the stars, and also the stars are smaller as well. So let's take a look at how we can do that using Lego pieces or views that we already have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a V stack, which puts things vertically, and I want to put the stars on top and then I want to put a text label below. Right, so my VStack, there's my VStack, open curly bracket, end curly bracket, is going to contain my 5 stars, put them in there, plus a text label that says reviews 361. Again, we're just making up this number, and you can see there, but it's laying all the elements vertically. What we can do is inside this VStack, we can put these 5 stars in, you guessed it, an H stack. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to write H stack inside the VStack, open up the bracket here, and behind the 5 image views, I'm going to close the curly bracket. So now you can see that. Now, if you notice in the outcome, the card, we actually have stars that are orange, as well as everything is a lot smaller. So you saw an example of changing color for the text earlier. Well, that would also apply for the icons. We could do it with these icons. Instead of applying the modifier on every single image, I'll show you what that would look like. I can say foreground style dot orange. That would just change 1 star. But I'm not going to apply it to that single image. I'm going to apply it to the VStack, which contains the 5 stars and the text. Take a look at what happens. It applies it to everything inside the VStack. That's what we want. We also want to make it a lot smaller. So let's add another modifier. This one's going to be a font one. Dot caption. This is a size. Caption is a size. Notice that it changes the text and the image icons. And that is because SF symbols, they can be treated like text as well. Different from this Niagara Falls image. If you add a font caption to the Niagara Falls image, it's not going to make it smaller. It's only because for these icons, it's also treated like text. That's why you can apply these foreground colors and font sizes to them. Okay, we're doing very well. Let's take a look at the card again. And we also have some icons at the very bottom below the description. So let's go ahead and add that. So at this point, your SwiftUI code is getting quite long and it might be hard to read. Well, you can kind of collapse your container views, kind of like when we collapse this folder inside the file navigator. You can see here, I can close the folder. Same thing can be done with this VStack. I can close it. And the way you do that, you can either do it with shortcut keys, or you can go up here into editor. And then you go to code folding, and you can fold or unfold. So take a look at the shortcut keys there. Right, Command, Option, left arrow or right arrow. Okay, so let's fold, see what happens there. You see it's like collapsing the VStack. And if you want to expand it, you can double click on these 3 dots, or you can use the shortcut key or the menu item to unfold it. And this actually keeps things organized and easy for you to read. I'm also going to collapse this H stack. There we go. So now I can see I have the image, I have the H stack, which contains the title and the stars. I have the description. And below this, I also want to put the icons. So I'm going to create another H stack. And I'm going to put image, system name, and let's take a look at what we have here. We've got this one, fork.knife. So we're going to copy the name actually, and we're going to put it in there. Copy this. We're going to have another one. We're going to use this one, binoculars fill. Okay, and then we are going to push it all the way to the right. Remember, we have a view that can help us do that, right? I'm going to add a spacer on the left. I'm going to expand and push all of these icons to the right. Furthermore, I want to change the foreground color of these to gray. You can see I'm moving faster now is because you've done this before. I'm going to change the font to caption as well. As you get more used to it, you can type this out. And you can already envision it in your head, and you can work really fast. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but the spacing is an issue, right? I want to add some spacing vertically between the different elements. Well, the VStack actually has another configuration parameter that you can configure. I hit comma, I add spacing, colon, and I can specify the amount of spacing between each element. I'm going to put 20 so you can see how that looks like. You can always change it and you can see how it gets reflected. If I do 40, you can see there's a big difference, right? 20 is where it's at. So I have to ask you, are you pretty amazed at what you've done so far? From not knowing any SwiftUI code to being able to build something like this? We're nearly there, and I hope everything has been very easy to understand so far. The last thing we have to do is to create a card background and a little drop shadow, which will be done within 20 seconds. So let me collapse all this stuff in the VStack because we want to apply the change to everything, to the entire VStack containing all of the views, right? I am going to fold that up. Remember, you can go to editor, code folding to just do what I did, or you can use the shortcut keys. But there is a modifier here that says padding. Let me get rid of that so you can see what happens when I do. Look, our borders are gone, our margins. Now it's like sticking to the edge of the screen. So what padding does is it gives, by default, 20 points of margin on the left, right, top, and bottom. Now you can specify which edges you want, but by default, it applies 20 and to all sides, which is actually fine for us right now. We are going to add an additional modifier to create a background for the card. And the modifier is background. Now, this modifier is a little bit special because it allows you to specify another view as the background. So you notice how for this, I got rid of the pair of brackets here because you can keep it. You can specify additional configuration options for the background, but we don't need to. And then it's got a set of curly brackets. By now, I think you're starting to realize that when you see a set of these curly brackets, it means that things go in between them, like other views. It's kind of like a container view. So for this background, I want to put this new view that you haven't seen yet. It's a new Lego piece. And this is called a rectangle. It's actually a shape. So that's what it is. By default, it would be black, but don't worry, we're going to change the color of it. We are going to change it to, and to change the color of the rectangle, you use foreground style, and we are going to choose a different color. For example, you choose blue. We'll leave it at blue for now because ultimately I want white, but it's going to be hard to see if it's white against the white background. So let's leave it at blue right now so we can see what we're working with. Then I want to round the corners of it. So just like how we did, let's expand this. Just expand right here. What we did with the image, right? We can copy this modifier, scroll down, and we can apply it to our blue rectangle. So now you can see it's rounded right here. Perfect. That looks like a card, right? And then furthermore, we can add a drop shadow. There's an actually easy modifier we could use for that. Dot shadow. Take a look at that. Let's just say 15 for our shadow. And although it's a little hard to see, especially with the blue rectangle against the edges, so what we can do is we can add additional padding to our card. So you see how we have padding here and then the background? And then after the background, we're just going to add another set of padding like that. Now let's change the blue background to white by changing this dot blue to dot white. And then it's a little more easy to see the shadow there. So I would consider this done, but if you really want to copy the image that I showed you in the beginning, we are missing a teal background. For that, you're going to have to learn about a new view layout container. So you know about VStack, you know about HStack, there's one more. It's called ZStack. or Z stack if you're Canadian like I am. And this actually allows you to stack things on top of each other, right? V stack, vertical, H stack, horizontal, Z stack or Z stack on top of each other. So let's collapse this entire V stack so it's easier to see. We can collapse this background as well. Okay. And what we want to do is essentially create a Z stack, put a color as the base layer, and then put this entire V stack on top of it. Does that make sense? Let's try it out. So we are going to type in Z stack. I'm going to call it a Z stack. Hopefully that doesn't bother you. And to specify a color that completely fills the view, you can use the color view. And then you can configure it inside this pair of brackets using dot. You can do, let's say, is there a teal? Yes, there's a teal. Is that a different teal than what I used? Yeah, I didn't use teal. I used dot, mint. All right, that's what I meant to use. And then we are going to take this entire V stack and we are going to put it right here. So if you can imagine the Z stack, then we put the color, and now we're going to put the V stack on top of the color. Okay, so we're going to cut that. We're going to paste it in here. Here we go. Why is the color not extending to all of the edges? Well, this is a great time to talk about the safe area. So the safe area is the white spaces that you see, and it is designated for things like the battery indicator, the time. Down here, there's like a little bar that you can drag up to switch apps. So those are areas that iOS says you shouldn't block this area. You shouldn't put views here because it might obstruct those other indicators that the user needs to see. But if you really, really have to, we've given you a modifier to allow you to go into those areas. So the modifier is called, we're going to add it to the color because we want the color to go into the safe areas. Dot ignores safe area. Pretty self-explanatory, right? So then it'll go exactly as we expect. It covered every single region. So I think you should be pretty proud of yourself from not knowing any SwiftUI code in the beginning to now being able to build this yourself. And you learned all of that in less than an hour. You also learned about a variety of new SwiftUI views that you can use, a variety of view containers for laying out all of the different elements on your screen. Beyond that, you can always continue to follow more tutorials and learn more, assimilate, right, by doing, or you can use the AI assistant to ask questions about how you would accomplish certain things or what views are available for sliders and drop downs and switches and things like that. So again, congratulations. Wow, in 3 lessons, you've done quite a lot here. You've learned how to use Xcode, you've learned SwiftUI code, and you are writing and coding your own views. That's huge. And although you only have a few Lego bricks to play with right now, you are going to accumulate more knowledge on more SwiftUI views as you go along. And your tool belt or your chest of Legos, they're going to grow. So over time, you're going to be able to build more complex user interfaces. Now, the last step is to learn Swift code. But we're only 3 lessons in. Does it really take 5 lessons to learn Swift code? Well, we are actually going to be building an app together, which is going to tie everything together. And so that's what we're going to get started on in the next lesson. Before we do that, though, if you want to check your work, so to speak, and you want to download the project, which I used in the video so that you can just check your SwiftUI code against mine, I have a link in the description below the video where you can download it. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to lesson 4. Now, this is a monumental point in your learning journey because you're going to be starting your first app. And what we're going to be building is this work hard game. I chose a game because it's more fun for students to learn. And it's also going to provide just enough challenge for you to feel a sense of accomplishment as well as teach you a couple of new tricks. Furthermore, if you have a physical iPhone or a device, you can actually, by the end of the series, install this app onto the device, and you can take it around and you can show your friends and family what you built. So that's pretty cool as well. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so here's what we're going to be building. Basically the war card game. When you hit deal, the cards get randomized, and whoever wins, they get a point. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on the user interface. As you can see here, we've got a logo image, we've got card images that change, we've got a button that you can tap that is also an image, we've got some text labels down here, and we've got a green background, which is actually an image as well. Let's dive in and start this Xcode project. All right, so I've got Xcode open. We're going to create a new Xcode project. Again, you can always go to File, New, and choose Project. We are going to create an iOS app here. So let's choose iOS and choose App. Even though this is technically a game, this is a different framework for building other types of games. This is more of an app that functions as a game. We're going to choose App. For the product, make sure you name it something you like, because we are going to continue building on this Xcode project over the next few lessons. So let's go ahead and say war card game, and remember where you're going to save this. Nothing else changes. Make sure interface is SwiftUI, language is Swift. Testing and storage can both be none. Team can also be none as well. We're going to save it. I'm going to save it in day 4 of this series. If you want to download this project, you can go ahead, check below in the description. There's a link to do so. In this source control area, make sure this is unchecked. We don't need to use this right now. Click on create, and we have our Xcode project. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to add all of the image assets that we're going to need. So again, I have a link below where you can download these image assets. It's going to be a zip file. I'll show you what it looks like. So it's going to look something like this. You're just going to double click it and unzip all of these images. So there's actually a few backgrounds that I've included that you can use. There's the button image. There's also a bunch of card images. So let's go ahead and go into the asset library and add these things. So I'm going to click inside this folder. Just going to close all of these. Okay. I'm going to highlight all of these folders and just drag it in here. So now we have all of the assets. So backgrounds, we have plain cloth, 2 different types of wood, and then there's a bunch of card images. Okay, and then we've got the logo, and we've got the button as well. So just like we did in the previous lesson where we built the Niagara Falls card, we are going to be building the user interface for this war card game using things like the image view, the text view, H stacks, V stacks, spacers, the Z stack for the green background in the back. And that's pretty much all that's involved in building the UI that you see. So I want to give you this opportunity to build this war card game user interface on your own, because you have all of the knowledge you need. And even if you don't quite succeed, you will at least identify all of the gaps in your knowledge. And that's really, really valuable, because sometimes as we're learning, we feel like we understand and we're not really applying the knowledge, but we're understanding everything that's being explained. That doesn't really translate to real skills in the sense that you can use them to produce something. And remember, if you get stuck, you can always ask the AI assistant for help. Now, try not to ask the assistant to do the whole thing for you, because there will be no learning to be had if you do that. But if you get stuck, you can't get something to look a certain way, ask the AI for some options about what to do. Or if you're experiencing a red error and you're not sure why, again, use the AI chat assistant and ask them why this is not working. Go ahead and download the image assets, start your Xcode project, pause this video, and try it out for yourself. You're going to get so much more out of this lesson if you at least attempt it. Okay, and we're back. How did you do? Don't worry if you didn't get it exactly looking like this, because I would say that any work that you put in at this point is progress and you're making a gain. There's value in it. Here's what I see when I take a look at this. Ignoring the green background for a second, just looking at the elements on the foreground, I see a V stack that contains everything vertically. We've got the logo, and then we've got an H stack containing the 2 card images. Below that, we have the deal image. And then below that, we have an H stack containing 2 V stacks. And in each of those V stacks is the player label and player score. And then just like we did with the card demo, we put the whole V stack into a Z stack so that we can put a green background underneath of all of those elements. So these were all elements that we learned in the previous lesson. You can go and review that. If you're just jumping in at this point, it might be a little confusing to you. I'm not gonna lie. But let's go ahead with that plan and build it out in Xcode now. All right, so here we have our project and we have all of the image assets added here. We are going to start with the V stack. And I'm gonna get rid of these 2 elements so that we can type it out ourselves. So remember, first we've got the logo and then we've got an H stack with the 2 cards. I want to show you something right now that might be useful, and that is comments or documentation. You see how up here in lines 1 to 6, there are these double forward slashes, and then there's some text here, information. This is not code. It's just documentation. And Xcode is going to ignore this stuff when it runs the project. It's more for someone who's reading the code to understand what it is. We can add our own comments. So I can add 2 forward slashes, and then I can put logo here to remind myself about what this is. Then I can put cards. I can put button, put scores. This helps just organize things in my mind and lay things out. So then we can go ahead and actually add those views. So image, we've got, what did we call it? I don't remember. Probably logo, right? So we've got logo, we've got button, we've got card 2 to 14. We've got background cloth. Okay. And try to memorize those things as we go. So we have logo. The canvas is still loading. Perfect. We have our logo. And then we have cards. Remember, there's 2 cards, right? So that's going to be an H stack. And we're going to do image, card, let's say card 3. Doesn't really matter at this point, I suppose. And let's say card 11. Okay. And there's going to be some space in between them, right? So I'm going to use a spacer to push them apart. Like that. Kind of hard to see on the white background, would you not agree? So what we can do is just add that green background right now so it's easier to see. Let's collapse the V stack. And let's go ahead and create our Z stack here. Okay, and then we're going to, instead of using a green color, we're going to use an image for the background. So we're going to do image, and I think it was background dash, how about dash cloth? Let's use that. Notice I'm using these arrows to navigate back and forth. They're kind of like your browser arrows. Helps you jump from file to file quickly. Background dash cloth. Oh, okay. It's got like this burlap texture. I didn't see that. Let's use plain. There we go. And then I'm going to move this V stack, Command X. I'm going to put it in here so it goes on top of everything. Perfect. Okay, so let's continue on with the button. We've got image, button, and then for scores, we have H stack, and it contains 2 V stacks. So there's V stack number 1, and there's V stack number 2. And inside the V stack, there's going to be 2 text views. So one is going to be the player and the CPU label, and then underneath we're going to have the score. Wait, well, this is a number, right? And that's basically all the elements that are on the screen. Now we just have to arrange the layout a little bit, add appropriate spacing and things like that to make it look like the way we want it to. So regarding this spacer here, it is expanding to take up as much space as possible, pushing the cards all the way to the left and the right. Now, you may not have chosen to do this. You might have actually remembered that with the stacks, there's a spacing configuration, or you could specify maybe 50, and that would kind of give you that little gap between the cards. You might specify also here spacing 50, which would then space out all the elements. And you know what? That looks pretty good. I would be pretty happy with that. I do want to show you another way though. So let me just remove the spacing. And it has to do with the spacer. So the spacer right now is in between the two cards, expanding to all the space and pushing the cards all the way to the left and the right. What would happen if we added a spacer to the left of the card 3? Like that. Well, it would also compete for space. What if we added a spacer on the right side of the jack? It would also compete for space and expand. So right now there's 3 spacers in that H stack, all competing for space. What ends up happening is that they take up an equal amount of space each. So they divvy up the empty space between all of them. So you could do the same thing with the V stack as well. So for example, if I add a spacer at the top here, it would push everything downwards because it's expanding, right? But if I add a spacer below the logo as well, now there's 2 of them competing for space. What if I add a spacer underneath the H stack of the cards? It will also demand space. What if I add a spacer below the button? It will also demand space. And then what if I put a spacer below the scores? It will also demand space. The nice thing about using spacers for spacing things out like this is that it's dynamic. You're not specifically saying 50 points or 20 points. And this keeps things dynamic for different screen sizes. For an iPad, for let's say landscape orientation, for an iPad mini, for an iPhone Pro Max versus just a regular iPhone, the spacers will just divvy up all the available space and keep things nice and equal. Let's also add spacers in between these labels here. So we're going to add a spacer in between here. We're going to add a spacer to the left of the player stack, and then add another spacer to the right of the CPU stack, thereby putting it into the middle. Now that everything's looking nice and spaced out, the last thing to deal with is customizing the font sizes and the colors. So first of all, let's make all of the text white by adding a modifier to this H stack, which would then apply to all of the views inside of it. So I'm going to hit dot, foreground style, dot, white. Changes it all to white. I'm also going to apply a font sizing to the score. We're going to say font dot headline, enter. That makes the score bigger. We're going to say font open bracket dot large title. That's going to make that score bigger. I'm going to do the same thing with the other number, large title. And then we are going to apply a modifier to the player label. We're going to say font. And for this one, we're going to say headline. So I'm also going to apply the same modifier to CPU label. And then I want to add a bit of space in between the text elements. Now you can do spacing on the V stack, like I showed you before, like that. Or I'm going to show you a different way. I mentioned before that you can add padding to a specific edge. So that's what I want to do for this player label. I want to add padding at the bottom. So let's add an additional padding, but when you open up the brackets, you hit dot bottom. So you can see by default, it adds 20 padding to the bottom. If you want to change that number, you can say comma 10. It's going to be a little less. Maybe you only want 5 or something like that, even less. So we'll stick with the default, which is 20. We do the same thing with the CPU label here, padding dot bottom. All right, that's our work hard game user interface. So in this lesson, I hope the takeaway is that despite having a small collection of SwiftUI views at your disposal, you can still build some pretty complicated things just by arranging them in different ways. Now that the user interface is done for this app, we need to start thinking about adding the app logic. And to do that, we need to learn some Swift code. So this is a perfect segue into the next few lessons where we're going to explore Swift together. Again, if you want to download this Xcode project that you've seen in this video, there's a link in the description below. All right, you're doing amazing so far. In the previous lesson, you built the user interface for the work hard game, but right now it doesn't do anything. We need to hook up some functionality and logic to the app, which is why we are going to dive into Swift code in this lesson so that we can do that. Now, the start of this Swift coding journey is going to take a couple of lessons to get the initial foundation before we can go back to the work hard game and wire it up. So do have a little bit of patience and dig your heels in a little bit, because there will be a little bit of challenge, especially if you've not coded before. But I'm going to walk you through it in simple terms, and we're going to do things together. And I'm confident that you're going to get there, because I've had so many success stories of people going through these 8 days and just feeling like they unlocked a new superpower. All right, let's go ahead. Let's get started. First, let me introduce you to an Xcode playground. It's a place that we can experiment with code without building a full-fledged project. So it's not going to create a project. It's not going to create all those files. It's going to be a single file that we can write some code. We can run it and see what the results are and just experiment with it. And how you create a playground is go to File, New, Playground. Now, don't confuse this with the iPad Playgrounds app, because that's a learning app on the iPad to learn iOS app development done by Apple, whereas Xcode Playgrounds is more of like a code playground where you can experiment with things. So under iOS, let's choose blank and let's create the file. Just put it somewhere. I want you to notice that it's a lot simpler looking than Xcode project, right? Like a full project. I'm actually having a little trouble expanding this right now. There we go. I'll point out a couple of things. So number one is there's still a navigator, okay, but it's just this file. There's still an AI coding assistant panel, which is very useful for learning code. There is also this utility area or inspectors panel. And then down here, there's still a debug panel, which I'm actually going to expand. So you do that by clicking this button here, because we're going to be outputting some results down here. By default, you're going to have this single line of code. You can just ignore the import statement. That's not really relevant to what we're doing right now. Before we dive into what this line of code is, also notice that if you hover your mouse along these line numbers, you'll see this play icon. And that's equivalent to the run icon that is in the full-fledged Xcode project to run your project in the simulator, except this is going to be to run the lines of code. Now, I just hit that run button. If it's the first time, it's going to take a few minutes, just like the iOS simulator. You can see, because I've done it, it's pretty instantaneous. It shows this results panel here, but we're not going to focus on that because I actually find it a little confusing for teaching. We're going to focus on the code editor and the console area, the debug area down here. So to close this results panel, we're going to hit this icon and we're going to just say show editor only. You can always go back, hit show results here, or you can click this icon and show results here. Okay, so let's dive into the code now. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. Now, the first thing I want to bring up is that the code that we're writing in the lessons before, that code was to generate the views and the user interface. The code that we are writing now is used to express the logic or the brains behind the app. So this code will be more of taking actions and it does things instead of the SwiftUI that was displaying things. So let's start with a simple statement that does something. So we're going to hit enter to start a new line, and we're going to print brackets, and then we are going to put quotations, and we're going to put a piece of text. And then we're going to hit this blue run icon beside that line of text, and you should see something appear down here. Again, if this is the first time you're hitting run, it might take a few minutes for the simulator or whatever's happening behind the scenes to run. You'll see it in the status bar up here, and then you should see the result being output down here. It printed this piece of text down here into the console. Simple enough, right? Let's try something different. What if I say print, open up the brackets again, but this time I put greeting? What happens now? Actually, I didn't even have to hit run. It just ran it automatically. But down here, take a look at what happens. This line prints out Chris, and this line prints out hello playground. But I didn't write hello playground, I wrote greeting. Notice when I put my cursor here, it highlights that. So that gives you a clue. Well, let's read this code. This piece of text, hello playground, if greeting equals that, and I print out greeting, I get hello playground. Okay, what if I change this piece of text to hi? What do you think will happen? Well, we're about to find out. It's going to run it, and then we are going to print out Chris as expected. And now when we print greeting, it says hi. So it seems to me like this greeting is referring to whatever piece of text I put here. So let's talk about that. In Swift code, this is called a variable. This var keyword is to declare a new variable. This is the variable name, and it can be whatever name you want. This is how you reference the piece of data. This text is a piece of data, and we're going to talk about what other types of data there are in just a second. For now, we know this is text. This equal sign is what's called an assignment operator, and it's basically assigning this piece of text to this variable. And now whenever we want to recall this piece of text or reference it, we just have to use the variable name as we do here. So what's the point of a variable anyways? Well, it's to keep track of our data. So for example, if we look at our war card game, we need to keep track of the player score and the CPU score, right? So for example, and this might be, instead of greeting, we might say player score. And then we put player score here. Let's see what happens. We can get rid of that. So this outputs a 0 into the console. The thing is, we wouldn't necessarily store the score as a piece of text because you can't do math on a piece of text. So we would probably want to store it as a number, which gets us into different data types. So if I remove the quotes, you can see it's a different color. This is treated as a number. Let's take a brief look at this slide and take a look at the different data types that you can use. So there are definitely more data types than this, but I don't want to overwhelm you. Only want to expose at this point what you need to know. You've seen text data. This type of data is actually called a string. Now, whole numbers, this is called an integer. This is kind of the same as math terminology. Now, for decimal numbers, this data type is called a double. And one last data type I want to mention that's really useful for right now is Boolean. And this is either true or false. So it's only one of these two states. So those are the only data types I want to introduce you to at this point, as to not overwhelm you. So now let's jump back into the playground and try some of this stuff out. So let's declare another variable. Now declare is the word we use when we write this line, var, and then the variable. This is creating a new variable, but declare is the right word to use. So we are going to declare another variable to keep track of the CPU score. And I'm going to assign 0 to it. Now these variables are not very useful unless we can update them and change the number, right? So let's pretend that the player just scored a point and we want to increase the player's score. Well, we've already declared the variable up here in line 3 using the var keyword. We don't need to redeclare it. In fact, if we try to, we are going to get an error. So if you try to do var player score. We want to increase it, right? We want to change it to 1. If you try to do this, it's going to say invalid redeclaration because it's already been declared. Now here's a good instance where I can show you how useful this AI panel is. For example, you could ask it by opening the AI panel and typing it in. Why is this wrong? Can you explain to me what this means? Or you can just hit generate. Well, this actually, you may not. So this will actually fix it. But if you read it, it will actually also explain to you what the issue is. It's errored because it's declared twice. In Swift, you can only declare a variable once. Okay, subsequent changes to its value should use assignment. So let's close this for a second and take a look at what it's done for us here. So in order to change the data in the variable, we don't have to use the var keyword again. All we have to type in is the variable name equals and then the updated value. Also, take a look at this print player score. Now prints 1 instead of 0. So you can think of this code being executed from top down. First, when we declare it 0, and then here, when we set it to 1, player score is 1, and then we print it out, and that's why it only prints out 1. Now, because I might not always know what the previous score was when I want to increase it by 1, instead of writing the actual number, I can make it dynamic. So player score references the current score, right? So if I want to update player score and increment it by 1, I can say player score is equal to whatever the player score was before plus 1. So this would be 0 plus 1, and it would assign it as the new value for the variable player score. So here you can see that the result is still 1. But what if I do this again? What if I do this twice? Then it increments it by 1 here. This turns to 2, and then this will print out 2, as you can see right there. Okay, so you've learned that variables are used to keep track of data. You've learned about different types of data you can use. Before we move on, I want to mention that variables actually have a data type. So when you declare var player score equals 0, because 0 is an integer, it is inferred that player score is an integer type variable. That means that if you try to assign a piece of text, also known as a string, right, to player score, it's going to give you an error. Cannot assign value of type string to int. Likewise, say we have a variable named name and we assign player to it. If you try to update name and you try to assign it a number, you're going to get the same error. Cannot assign the value of type int, because 90 is an int, to type string. Name is of data type string. Sometimes what you'll see is that these variable declarations explicitly say the data type. So how you can do that is it's just a longer hand form. You write var variable name colon and then the data type. So here it's completing it for me. And we have int. So this variable declaration is saying declare a new variable with the name player score with the data type int and then assign 0 as its initial value. Same thing goes for here, colon string. So writing it this way is just a little more clear. For someone reading the code, you can choose to do it this way, but oftentimes we just leave this explicit data type out because whatever type of data you assign to it initially, that's going to be the type of variable that it is. And the last thing I want to introduce to you that is pretty much a variable with one special caveat. This is called a constant. It's basically a variable that cannot be changed. So for example, this variable called name, if I change this keyword from var to let, this is now a constant. It's not called a variable anymore, it's called a constant. And what that means is that it still works the same way as a variable in that it keeps track of data. So I can print name, and what that's going to do is print out player, as you can see. But if I try to update that, let's say I say name equals Chris, it's not going to let me do that. Cannot assign value to, because name is a let constant. Why would you want to use a constant over a variable? Because some things you know will not change. Like let's say in our war card game, we only want to play 12 rounds. You might say let rounds equals 12. It's just a number that you want to use. You don't need it to change. It's always going to be 12. So you use a constant for that, and you can guarantee that it won't get overwritten by another number. But whereas things that you do need to be dynamic and it does need to be updated, you are going to be using a variable instead. And so that's pretty much your first lesson for Swift coding. Okay. Different data types, right? Useful ones, common ones include string, int, double, and Boolean. You've seen variable declarations. You've seen assigning and reassigning data into variables. And you've seen constants as well. And lastly, you've also learned that variables have a specific data type. It's just that most of the time we don't write out the data type of the variable. Instead, it is inferred from the data that we assign to it. All right, so today you learned about variables, constants, and how to declare them, and also how to assign data to them. Now, this knowledge is kind of abstract right now, but how it applies to the war card game is if you think about us playing that game, we're going to need to keep track of some data, correct? For example, the scores, for example, which cards to show. So that is how variables and constants are going to be used. And we are building our way up to the point where we can hook up that deal button to perform all of the functions of the app. So have a little patience. You are making great progress. I also prepared a set of notes to help you as you are learning the Swift code for these next few lessons, especially helpful for someone who is new. If you want to review that, you can download these notes in the description below. Last lesson, you learned about Swift variables, and they are going to be very important when it comes to keeping track of player score and data, among other things in our war card game. In today's lesson, you're going to learn about Swift functions, and you can think of a function as basically a group of code statements. Now, let me tell you why this is relevant for what we're doing here. Think about what we want to happen when the deal button is tapped on. We need to randomize a card for the player. Then we need to update the card image for the player. We need to randomize a card value for the CPU. Then we need to update the CPU's card image. Then we need to calculate who has the higher card value. And then we need to update the score labels on the screen. There's at least a line of code for each of those actions that we want to happen. So we can use a function and group all of those code statements together. And we can also give that function a name so that we can use it. That brings me to the point, how do you use it? Remember in the last lesson about Swift variables, you can assign a piece of data to a variable, you give the variable a name, and then whenever you call that name, you can access the data that you assigned to that variable. Well, a function works the same way. When the deal button is tapped, we can just call the function name and have all of those code statements happen. All right, so let's open the Xcode playground and let's try this out. So I'm looking at the playground that we used in the last lesson for variables. We're going to continue off of this for functions. And I think you're going to be surprised at how fast this lesson is going to go. Now, the first order of business, how do we declare a function? Just like how we had a special keyword to declare variables and constants, we also have a special keyword for functions, and that is func, space. You're going to see that it turns pink because it's recognized as a keyword. And following that, we're going to have the function name. Now you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it my function. I don't know if you noticed in the last lesson how I named things, first letter being lowercase, each subsequent word having a capital letter. I think that's called camel case or snake case. I forget. You can do it however you want. You can name it in all capitals if you want, but this is the standard that everyone uses. Now, autocomplete is suggesting how I'm going to complete my function, and it's giving things away. Okay, the next part of a function declaration are these rounded brackets or parentheses, whatever you want to call them. So for me on my keyboard, it's Shift 9 and Shift 0 to open up this pair of brackets. Now, what goes in here? Why do we do this? This set of brackets allows you to specify function parameters. Parameters allow you to pass data into the function when you call it, in case you want to work with that data. in case the function needs some additional information to use with the code statements. In this lesson, we're not going to tackle parameters because we don't need them for the work hard game. In future lessons, when we need them, I'll show it to you then. Okay, so what's next? We need a pair of brackets to contain the grouping of code statements that make up the body of this function. So you use these brackets. For me, on my keyboard, it's Shift followed by the angle bracket beside the P. And the nice thing about Xcode is if you hit enter now after writing that first bracket, it is going to automatically create that closing bracket for you. So between these two brackets, the opening and the closing curly brackets, this is where you put all of the code statements that you want to happen when this function is called. Let me type in some of the code statements that we learned about in the previous lesson. We learned about print. Let's just start with one for now. So we have, when this function is called, it is going to print hey down in the console below. So let's run this code and let's see what output we get. And actually, you'll notice that nothing happens. Why is that? We wrote the print statement. And the reason is because we declared the function that has this code statement, but we never actually called the function. Remember, the code inside the function only gets executed when the function is called. So how do we do a function call? Well, we use the name. So we call here my function, and you can just hit enter. Notice that it includes the pair of rounded brackets. If we had some sort of details in there about input parameters to pass in, we would have to specify them in the function call as well. But that's nothing to worry about for this lesson. Notice that now that I've called the function, it actually executes the code statement inside of it, and I get the console output that I was expecting. If I put another line of code in here, and now I call my function, you're going to see that it runs both lines of code, and then I get hey and hello. Now that is basically what a Swift function is, and it is the simplest way you can use a function. So let me add a comment just to separate these here. And you learned about comments already when we were writing the SwiftUI code. This is just documentation that doesn't get executed as code. Now this is the basic way to use a function, and it's fine for what we need in this work hard game. There's a lot more that you can do with functions to make them more powerful, such as passing data into the function and also returning values or output from the function. You'll learn how to use Swift functions in these different ways in future lessons when we actually need to do that. For now, like I said, I don't want to overwhelm you. I just want to teach you exactly what you need to know to move on to the next step, and then we can build momentum that way. However, if you're really keen and you're really curious about what I just said, feel free to ask the AI assistant about function parameters and function return values. All right, now that you know about Swift variables and functions, you're in a great position to move on to the next step with the work hard game. In the previous two lessons, you learned about Swift variables and functions, and now you are ready to apply that knowledge to the work hard game. Let's take a look at how these two things can help us to change the images in the work hard game when the deal button is tapped on. All right, let's dive in. All right, so here we are finally back in the work hard game. Now, when you open up your project again, it might be missing a bunch of panels. They may have gotten closed due to some other projects you were working on. So you can go ahead and click this button to open up the navigators panel. And also this canvas, you can hit this blue button to load the canvas. Now I want to run the project so that we can remind ourselves what state the project is in. So the very first thing we're going to do actually is to work on this button. This is an image currently. So obviously you can't tap it. It doesn't do anything. It's just for display. Let's change that into an actual functional SwiftUI button. And remember that analogy I used about SwiftUI is kind of like working with Lego blocks. Well, you're about to get a new Lego block. That's the SwiftUI button. So locate the button image so I can see it here in my SwiftUI code. This is what we want to change. So let's just delete that for a second. And let me show you the syntax or the keywords, the SwiftUI code to represent a button. Before I show you the code, I want to tell you about a couple of different ways you can arrive at this conclusion yourself. just so that in the future, if you are not sure how to do something, you can use these tools at your disposal. So one way is to use the AI assistant. So you can go ahead and ask, how do I add a SwiftUI button? Because you might know that something exists because you've seen it in another app, or you've seen other people talk about it, or you've heard them talk about it. You just don't know how to do it yourself. So this would be a perfect use case. So this is one way where you can see, what code represents a button. That's one way. Another way is that there's something called the library. So if you go to View, and then you go to Show Library. So notice that the shortcut key for this is Command, Shift, and L. So you can always press that instead of going to this menu. And you might also have a button, a plus button here. Now it's not this little plus button that you see here. This is for adding a new tab. You might have another plus button there that would open this library pane. Depends on what version of Xcode you have and what sort of editor view that you have currently. But you can always press Command Shift L to launch this. And this is helpful because it gives you a library of all of the components in SwiftUI. So for example, on this first tab here under Views, you can see all of the different quote unquote Lego blocks at your disposal. You have the labels, you have the images, link, list, all these things. We're interested in button. In the future, you can also explore modifiers. We talked about what these are. They add different attributes, changing behavior and changing appearance of your views. These are the things down here where you see this text label. There's like a dot font, dot padding. Those are modifiers. So this is a list of those modifiers that you can use. And then there are several more here that are not as commonly used, at least for me. This one contains different APIs that you can access. And in non-technical terms, it means just allowing your app to speak to other things on the phone, perhaps the address book, perhaps different apps, perhaps like launching the browser, things like that. And then there's your media library. This one is useful for searching the images in your app. And then there's different things like that. The color library and SF symbols. Yeah, this is useful. So we've used a couple of these symbols back in lesson 3 when we were first learning about SwiftUI. But coming back to the button, what you can simply do is click and drag this into here. And there is your basic button. You'll notice that it matches what we have here in the code snippet in the AI panel, right? I think it's important that when we're learning how to code here and build iOS apps, to ask the AI panel how to do something rather than do this for me. Because when you ask how and you can read the explanation, you end up learning. If you just ask it to do it for you, there's less learning involved. Okay. So for this button, let's change this string inside. This is the piece of text that you're going to see as the button. So we're going to call this deal. And the action is going to be what happens when the button is tapped on. So let's do a simple print statement. And look at this. It's like in context. It's in context with our app. Okay, so I'm going to save it and let's rerun the app. You can actually even just use the canvas here. You should be able to see the button and also interact with it. All right, so you tap on this deal button and let's bring up the console here. So if you go in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see there's these different tabs that you can expand, right? So you can expand this tab here. You can see as I am tapping the deal button, you can see that it's executing the code in here. Okay, so that's a basic button. Pretty easy, right? Now you have another SwiftUI Lego piece to work with. However, this button doesn't look so good. We want to change how this button looks. So I don't know how to do that, right? Let's ask AI. Well, I do know, but I want to teach you to rely on this AI assistant because it's as good as having a mentor sit beside you. Ask AI. How do I use an image for the button? You can even say, how do I use the button image asset? And it'll give you the code, but it's done it for you. I was about to say that if you just ask it in a more generic way, you can apply the knowledge to your app in context. But this AI is so good that it has context of your project. It's literally just giving you the code that you need. So this is what this button looks like. You'll notice that it's formatted a little differently. It's got the keyword button, and then it's got a set of curly brackets. Inside this first set of curly brackets, we've actually got the action for the button, like what it does when it's tapped on. And then you have this label, colon, followed by another set of curly brackets. And in between the label curly brackets, you're putting the SwiftUI code that represents the button. So in this case, we're using the image view to add an image. And these modifiers are added to make sure that the image is the right size, essentially. So let's do this. Instead of copying and pasting, let's try to type this out ourselves to get some practice, right? So we are going to just have the keyword. You're going to have the curly brackets. Let's leave it as deal tapped. Okay, and then what did we have next? We have label, colon, and then set of curly brackets like that, followed by the image. So the image asset name is button, if you can remember. And then let's refresh the canvas and see if we can view it this way instead. All right, and sure enough, we see the button. I'm gonna run the simulator so we can tap it just so we can see the print message. All right, sure enough, it is working. All right, so now we know how to use a SwiftUI button. Let's think about what we want to happen when this button is tapped, not just printing out something into the console window. We actually want to change the images, right? And we want to update the score labels. So let's take a look at the card images up here and think about how we can change them. This image right here, which we have coded, or we're pointing to the image asset card 11. If I change that 11 to 12, you're going to see, I might have to refresh the canvas here. It's refreshing. It's taking a little bit. See the jack change to a queen, right? If I change it to 13, you're going to see it change to a king. So this card 13 is pointing to the image asset. When we tap on this button, we want to change this to whatever card we've randomized it to. So how do you think that this button, the code that we write inside this button, can modify this data right here? If you think back on our Swift lesson on variables, we learned that you can assign a piece of data to a variable. And then whenever we wanted that piece of data, all we had to do was specify the variable name. So let's start by doing that. First, let's declare a variable and assign it the string data card 13. Where do we declare variables in here? Now this part you have to be a little bit careful because there is a certain area which you're going to be declaring your variables inside this view. And that is right under this first line. So if you hit enter, create some space here, you're going to create a variable here. Now do take note, you should recognize this var keyword from the variables lesson. This var body, this is declaring a body variable, right? And the data type, remember you can specify the data type of variables, is some view. And what we learned in the Swift lesson, the variables lesson, we use the equal sign to assign something to the variable. Now this looks a little bit different, right? It's got the curly brackets. Don't worry about it for now. This is what's known as a computed property. You'll learn about it in the future. Okay, so let's continue declaring our variable. Var, we're going to call this the player card, okay, because it's on the left side. Left side is for the player. So we're going to call it player card, and we're going to say equals card 13. If you wanted to, you could add the data type like that, but we can leave it out. It is implied from the data. Let's do the same thing for the CPU card. Card 10. Now let's come down here, now that we have these two variables, and change this. Instead of specifying the text directly in here, this is called hard coding it into the image. That's not what we want. Instead, we want to specify player card. And for this, we're going to specify CPU card. Now, this image is reading this variable and getting this piece of text. If I change this to 11, you're going to see that will also change because it is reading from that source, right? That variable. Okay, changed back to a jack. Same thing will happen for the CPU card. Okay. Now, because image is now reading from the player card variable, when the button is tapped and we randomize a new card for the player, we can actually change the image asset that player card points to simply by saying player card equals, let's say we randomized card 3, we will change it to card 3. Right? That is the benefit of making these point to those variables instead of just hard coding the text in there. I also want to use proper terminology here, although it may get a little bit confusing. So these are variables, but they're also known as properties of the content view. So player card is a property of content view. CPU card is a property of content view, and so is body. You can see that they all have the var keyword here. Now, before we move on, let's think about what else needs to happen when the deal button is tapped on. Aside from randomizing the cards and changing the card images, which we can now do because we've made these variables, we also need to calculate the scores and update the score labels. If you take a look at the score labels down here, we again have hard-coded 0 to the text. And so we won't be able to change that from the button. We need to, again, use properties to be able to access and change this value from the deal button. So let's add those as properties up here too. So let's say player score equals 0, and var CPU score equals 0 as well. Notice that instead of making these text, I'm going to make them numbers or integers because I want to be able to do math on it. I want to be able to add 1 to increment it. Down here, because a text label, it is expecting a piece of text, but now I'm trying to put an integer type variable into it, it's going to complain about that. So I'm going to try to put player score in here. You'll see that it recognizes that it's an int, but there's going to be an error. See, so let's take a look at what it's saying. No exact matches in call to initializer. What we have to do is actually convert this int to a string type before passing it to the text label. Now, if you encounter errors as you're building your app, again, let's see what the AI assistant can do for us. I'm encountering an error. Can you explain it to me? So instead of asking it to fix it, I'm asking it to explain it to me. So let's see what it says. Okay, player scores an int, but text expects something like string. Okay, so here are some ways to fix it. You're converting the string, converting the int to a string, or you can use what's called string interpolation. But let's go with this one because it's easier to understand, I feel, for you right now, is you are treating that integer as a string. So the way to do that is, I'm going to add some spaces here to make it easier for you to read. So that's the SwiftUI text label, right? If you type in string with a pair of brackets and inside you put the player score, think of it as you're encapsulating this integer in a string. You're like putting a string disguise on it. The actual term this is called is casting. And just like this, you're not going to get the error. So rely on that AI assistant to explain the errors to you so you can read and learn. Don't just say fix it. And this is a valuable learning tool. Oops, not card, score. Look at all the errors that can happen when you're not paying attention. So now that these two text labels are reading from player score and CPU score, when the button is tapped, I can also update them. I can say player score is going to be equal to player score plus 1. This is like adding 1 to the current player score. Another way to write this, as you'll see, is actually just plus equals 1. So then you're incrementing it by 1. If you do minus equals, you're going to be minusing 1 from the player score. Okay, but we're going to tackle this in the next lesson, and we're going to talk about why it's actually throwing an error. But before we move on to the next lesson, there's one more thing I want to integrate into this project right now, and that is the use of functions. When this button is tapped, we could write all the code inside this button. Or we can group that code into a Swift function, and then when this button is tapped, we just call that function. Now, what's the benefit? In this context, you could just put the code in here because the only place that uses that code, that series of commands, is the button. But in the future, as you're building other apps, there may be a series of commands that get used in multiple places, and you don't want to put that code in multiple places. You don't want to duplicate code. That's one of the golden rules of software development. You want to reuse as much as possible. So a function will let you do that because you can put that series of commands into a function, and then you can call that function from any place in your app project that you want. And you only have that series of commands in one place. Okay, so I'm going to get you into the habit of doing that. Let's create a function. Can neatly group all of the randomizing of the cards and calculating the scores in one place. Now, where do we put the function? That is easy to make a mistake. I want to teach you about code folding. That is just a way to modify what you see here to make it easier to work with your code. So if you put your cursor right under body, or you could just put it right after this curly bracket right here, and you go to editor at the top, and you go to code folding, you can choose fold. Take a look at that command as well, that shortcut key. By doing that, it basically just collapses all of the code in between the two curly brackets. And if you wanted to expand it again, you can just double tap it like that. So go ahead and fold it up to make it a little easier to read. So that's code folding and fold it up. And then what I want you to do is this curly bracket. You see when I put my cursor on it, there's a flash of yellow. That tells me where the corresponding bracket is, the pair, because they're always in pairs. So I click this, it tells me that this is the closing bracket for that opening bracket. What I want you to do is create a couple of lines right before this closing bracket. So I hit enter here. I basically want to do that. So after the closing bracket of the body, but before the closing bracket of the content view. So it should look like this. We're going to have function, and then we're going to have deal cards. And then we have a pair of rounded brackets, and we have a pair of curly brackets. And inside here, we're going to put all of that code. Randomize card values, update the card images, calculate the score, update the score labels. And now we can double tap on those three dots to expand the body again. And inside the button, instead of just writing lines and lines of code in here, all we need to do is say deal cards, and that is it. When this button is tapped on, it is going to call deal cards. You can right click and you can jump to definition, and that will come here, and you can see how this function is defined. Remember, if you've accidentally declared the functions in the wrong place, you're getting an error, use AI right here. So let's say I accidentally, I'm just gonna I'm going to move this. Actually, I'm going to make a mistake right here. Let's say I accidentally declared the function inside the body. That. Okay, I'm going to get an error. So what is my error? You don't understand why this is happening, okay? Say you're getting this error because you declared this function inside the body. How to fix it? Move the function out of the body and make it a method. Okay, so it's going to try to show you that where you should put it. Okay, so move this function. It was like in there before. You're going to move it. This is the function, right? Going to move it right before the closing bracket right there of the content view. Easiest thing to do is just to grab that function, do Command X. Okay, that's a bunch of empty space. We're going to go back up here, put my cursor there, and let's fold the code again so it's easier to read. And then you know where you want to add it is right there, right after the closing bracket of the body, but before the closing bracket of the content view. I'm going to paste my function right there. And also, if you're having trouble with this lesson, you can download my Xcode project in the link in the description of this video. We're on the home stretch. Now that we've added Swift variables and functions into the project, we are set up to change the images when the deal button is tapped on, as well as to compute and update the scores. So that's exactly what we're going to do in the next lesson. You made it, the final lesson of the 8-day beginner series. Today, we're going to complete the war card game by randomizing the card values, calculating the winner, and also updating the user interface. At the end, I'll show you how to put this app on your phone so you can show off to all your friends and family, and I'll give you a lesson plan that you can use to progress your skills on your own. All right, with that said, let's dive right in. So we're back in our Xcode project. Your code might look a little different because chances are my code is just folded up like that. Now, if we scroll down to the button, let's review what we want to happen. This SwiftUI button represents this deal view right here. When you tap on that button, it is going to call this deal cards function. Let's jump to that function by right-clicking it, jump to definition. It's going to go to where we have declared it. We want to do all these things: randomize the card values, update the card images, calculate score, and update score labels. And before we get into all of those, there is one thing that we need to make sure we can do first. And that has to do with these properties that we declared up here. Remember in the last lesson, I told you declaring these variables up here, they're called properties. And this is where things might get a little bit confusing. So let me fold up the body and let's take a minute just to explain what's going on. And if you don't know the shortcut key, just put your cursor right after the opening bracket, go up to editor, go to code folding, and then fold it up. All right, so I mentioned that a variable up here is a property of content view. They're going to be different from variables that you define or declare inside a function like this. So if I go var a equals 1, that's declaring a variable and assigning 1 to it. I can say 1 equals 2, and that's completely fine. But remember the purpose of why we defined these properties up here. We want to be able to change this data, right, to change the image that gets displayed. Let's try to do that. So if I say player card is equal to, let's say I want to change it to card number 3. It won't let me do that. It cannot assign to property. What's the difference? I can do it here, but I can't do it here. The difference lies in where it is declared, and that changes the scope of the variable. The scope of the variable means where it can be accessed from. When you declare a variable inside this function here, this variable a can only be accessed within this function, within these two brackets, this one opening and this one closing. So in here I can use a, but outside of this function, that's beyond the scope of the variable. So if I try to do a, it won't even recognize it here if I do it like this. Whereas if you declare the variable all the way at the top, right after the opening bracket of the entire content view, the scope of that, that's known as a property, the scope of that property goes into everything in between this curly bracket and the ending one. So I guess you could say as a general rule that the scope of a variable, as in where it can be accessed and where it can be used, is within the entirety of the curly brackets where it's declared in. The scope of these variables up here is this highlighted area. The scope of the variable A is this area right here. Okay, so that's the distinction. We'll get more into scope in the future lessons. But for now, just understand that when you declare a variable at the top level scope, let's say here, oops, I just noticed this little function I declared up here as a test. Just ignore that. So these variables that are declared up here at this top level scope, these are called properties. And there is something unique about properties. In order to be able to assign and update their data, you have to add a special keyword before the var at capital S state. And this changes player card into what's known as a state property. What that means is that potentially there may be views inside content view that depend on the value of that property. And because of that, the system will know that when you update the value in here, that it needs to go and check all of the other views inside content view to see if it needs to update it, which completely makes sense. If I update player card, the property, to card 3, I do want the UI system to recognize that and then update the image view, right, to show card 3 instead of card 11. However, if a property does not have the state keyword in front of it, then the system will know it doesn't have to dedicate any resources to this property because it won't change. So now that you know about state properties, we do need to change all of these to state properties because we will be modifying all of these values from within the deal cards function. So let's go ahead and add that keyword like that. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm also going to get rid of this. And now we are ready to get started with implementing these. Let's start by randomizing the card values. So what values do we need to randomize between? To give us a clue, let's look into the card assets. Notice that we have card 2 representing the number 2 all the way up to card 10 representing 10. Beyond that, we have face cards. Jack is 11, King is 13, and then Ace is 14, being the highest card value. So if we randomize the values between 2, which is our lowest card, to 14, which is our highest card, then it makes it easy for us to find the asset image name that represents the card value. Because if we randomize 12 and we want to display a queen, we know that we need to assign to the image the word card with the number 12. So let's go back to content view. We want to randomize between 2 and 14. How do we do that? Well, there is a function in the int data type. Remember data types back in the variables lesson? Ints represent whole numbers. And it's got a built-in function that we can call using something called dot notation. So let me show you how that looks. First, we write the data type followed by dot. And then here you can see all of the different functions that you can call. And here M actually stands for method, but I will explain that in just a second. So let's go ahead and type in RA for random. We can use this one where all you have to do is specify the lower end of the range and the higher end of the range. I wanted to wait because you can see that autocomplete shows you what this would look like. It even knows the numbers that I wanted to use, which is really strange. Random followed by pair of parentheses, and then inside we put the parameters or the input data for that function. It needs to know what the range is. So you type in the lower range, followed by 3 dots, followed by the upper range. Let's go ahead and do that. I double click that one, 2 ... 14. And that gives you any numbers between 2 to 14 inclusive. That means you can get 2 and you can get 14. Now, it will say that the result of this function call is unused. What that means is that this actually outputs or generates a piece of data, the random number, and you haven't used it. In order for us to use it, we need to capture that data, have a way to reference that piece of data. We could do that with variables. So why don't we declare a new variable called player value, and we're going to use the equal symbol to assign the result of this to that. And now whenever we want to get access to the random number, we just have to specify player value. So in order to update the card for the player, now that we do have a randomized card value, we can reference this property up here and just change the image asset name. Player card is equal to card plus the random number that we generated. The problem is that player card is accepting string data. The card is a piece of string data, but player value is int data. So we need to do what we did to display player score and CPU score into a text label. So if you don't remember, let me just scroll all the way down so that we can see what we did. So you see here, inside the text view, in order to display an int, we had to cast it as a string. We're going to do the same thing here with player value by saying string like that. Now it's going to treat that number as a string, and it's going to go card whatever number we randomized. So at this point, we can just test this out. If we tap on deal in the canvas, you might need to hit the refresh button. There's a button up here if you don't see anything or if it's not taking effect. When you tap on this, it is randomizing a number and updating the card image. So let's go ahead and do that for the CPU as well. CPU value is equal to int.random 14. And then down here, CPU card, which is this up here, this property. So we're going to update that card plus string. Make sure you type in CPU value here and not player value. And then now when you tap on this button, you're going to get both cards changing. All right, let's calculate the scores now. We have the scores stored in player value and CPU value. Now we need to know which is greater, so we need to be able to compare them. Luckily for us, Swift has comparison operators that we can use in order to compare these two numbers. We can ask the question, player value is greater than CPU value. And what this expression will evaluate to is whether this is true or not. So essentially, by writing this, you're asking, is player value greater than CPU value? And this expression, question if you will result in a Boolean piece of data. Remember back in lesson 5 when we were talking about variables, Boolean was one of the data types that I mentioned. It's either true or false. So this will either evaluate to true or false. If it's true, then we would want to increment player score by 1. If it's false, then we would want to increment CPU score by 1. But there also is a possibility where they are equal. So there are 3 different things that we want to do here, and which one we do depends on the scores. Luckily, inside Swift, there's something called an if statement, and it allows us to evaluate some sort of condition, just like this one. And depending if it's true or false, we can do different actions or execute different lines of code. So that's what we're going to use. I'm going to teach you how to use that. What we do is use the if keyword like that, and then you can put the expression, which is what we have here. So if player value is greater than CPU value, then we want to take an action. And the actions to take, if that were true, is within a set of curly brackets. Action taken if true. Now, if that is not true, nothing happens. It's just going to skip everything that's inside of these 2 curly brackets. So let's fill this out first, and then we'll fill out the other branches of logic. This is the first branch. What we would want to do here is add to the player score. So player score, one way to add 1 to it would be to say plus equals 1, and that will increment whatever player score is by 1. So if we hit deal, they're tied. That's a result that we also have to deal with. So here 10 is greater than 6, so we have incremented the score. And you'll see that the score label automatically updates. Why? Well, because player score is a state property, which means that when this value changes, the system knows it needs to look for any SwiftUI views that rely on that property and update that view. So if you scroll down here, this text label right here, it relies on that player score property. That's why when we update player score, the state property, this text label automatically updates. We don't need to handle that. The system does it for us. Let's handle the other branch of logic because the CPU potentially might win, right? So there are a couple of different things you could do here. You can say else. So if this is not true, then do this. We can say then CPU score. We increment that. So if the player wins, add to the player score. Otherwise, just add to the computer's score. And this would work, except it doesn't handle the case when it's tied, right? There's actually, in this case, when it is tied, the CPU gets a point, right? Because it's either the player value is greater than CPU value. In all other cases, we're going to do this. Well, that can't be right. So instead, we are going to say else if. And we have to add another expression. So if this expression evaluates to false, then it's going to check this one. So next we want to ask, okay, if the player value is not greater than the CPU value, then is the CPU value greater than the player value? Okay, and if the CPU value is greater than the player value, then we want to give the score to the CPU, obviously. But if that is not true either, there's only one possibility left, that they're equal. That's the only way both of these can be false. Then it's going to come down to the else. So we can have 3 different paths. Now, as to how you want to handle this, maybe we can just increment both. Or increment none if you want. It's up to you. Now, with this if statement, you can have as many else ifs as you want. This is a 3-path fork in the road. If you want to think of it that way, you can have 4 paths, 5 paths, or just 2 paths to you. But that's how you use an if statement. So just like that, you've completed the logic for the game. This last step, we don't actually have to update the score labels because SwiftUI handles that for us. So if you have a physical device such as an iPad or an iPhone, let me show you how to put the war card game on the device so you can take it around and show people what you've made. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your iPhone or iPad, you're going to plug it into the computer, and then you're going to unlock your device. You're going to get a pop-up that says, do you trust this computer? You're going to hit trust. You might have to enter in your PIN code. On your computer, you might also get a pop-up saying, do you trust this device? You're going to trust. And you might have to enter in your password. Well, once that happens, Xcode is going to start preparing the device for development. And you're going to see a status message here. It might take a while, but after it finishes doing its thing, you can then hit this drop down. This is the simulator that's currently selected that you're going to use to launch the app on. You're going to choose your device instead. So this is the device that I have connected to the computer right now. And check this out. It says that the OS on my device is actually lower than my Xcode project, this War Card Games minimum deployment target. Let me show you what that means. If you go into this project node here, you'll see that the minimum iOS that is required to install the War Card game is iOS 26. This has iOS 18 installed. So I am going to change the target to iOS 17. And then you'll see that that message goes away. And by doing this, what you're saying is that I'm going to be supporting devices that are on older versions of iOS, which means that some of the newer frameworks, APIs, SDKs may not be supported in older versions of iOS. And you'll see that there'll be like messages telling you like, hey, this feature is only supported in iOS 26. So if you are allowing your app to be installed on iOS 17 devices, you better have some sort of workaround or fallback for iOS 17 users. Anyways, that will get rid of that error. If you hit run now to try to install the app on your device, you might still get an error. Let's take a look at that. It says that signing requires a development team. Okay, so what this means is that when you put code on an actual device, Apple needs to be able to trace that code back to a developer. So you need to sign it with a digital signature. And the way you do that is you add your Apple account. So if you go to Xcode and settings here, under Apple accounts, you're going to be clicking this and adding your Apple ID. You don't need a paying Apple Developer Program membership in order to put apps on the device. So feel free, just add your Apple account there. And then if you go to, you see we're at the general tab. If you go to signing in capabilities, you're going to make sure that this is checked. And under the team, you are going to select that team that you just added, that account. And then if you hit the run button again, you should be able to install the app on the device. Now, if you're using a free Apple ID, the app will actually expire in 7 days on your device. They just do it that way, so it's for like testing purposes. If you have a paying Apple membership, it can stay on your phone for longer. But if it expires in 7 days, all you need to do is just install it on your phone again using the same process. And then you get another 7 days, and that's fine. So in that way, you are going to be able to install this app on your phone like so, and be able to use it and show off what you've made. Congratulations, you've got a really solid start. And if this is your first app ever, double congrats to you. But the question is, where do you go from here to continue progressing your skills? So I'm going to borrow the progression plan from my iOS Foundations course because the war card game is actually module 1 of that. I'll link to this page in the description below so that you can view it as well. I'm not going to go through every single lesson of the progression, but I will point out some notable SwiftUI views that I think will add a lot of variety and fun to your future app builds. So once you learn about the SwiftUI list, you'll be able to build apps with scrollable data. It's just lists of data, which is a lot of apps, admittedly. And there are also tab views. So a lot of apps have a navigation structure where you have tabs at the bottom to switch views. That's what a SwiftUI tab view is. Another one that's really fun is displaying images in a grid. You can use lazy V grids for that. So there's a lot here to explore. You don't have to take this iOS Foundations course, but I'll say that this specific progression plan or lesson plan has worked for many students. Many of them have gone on to find jobs or become iOS indie developers. So even if you don't take this specific course, I would recommend that you go and do some self-study, but follow this progression plan. I've laid it out very carefully so you are building your skills layer upon layer. However, if you do want to continue learning with me in the same format that we've done in the last 8 lessons, then I've got a special offer for you to join CWC Plus in the description below this video. Inside CWC Plus, not only can you access the iOS Foundations course, but you can access the next courses that come after that. It's all a progression as you continue to build and invest in your skills. You'll also get access to our private CWC Plus community where you can attend live events, connect with other iOS learners such as yourself, as well as get support on all of the lessons and training with our CWC coaches. Either way, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for learning with me during these 8 lessons. If you know someone who also wants to start learning iOS app development, forward them this series. If it worked for you, it's going to work for them as well. Lastly, I hope you subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more app development tutorials. Congratulations again, and I'll see you in the next video.